May the road rise up to meet you, and the wind be on your back. May the sun shine warm upon you.
Hello and welcome back. Today we want to look at week 7 of the Road Rising series, which is going to cover days 36 to 42. Or if you have the edition of the Road Rising that follows the calendar, then you'd be looking at February 5th to February 11th. After the pilgrim's encounter with the evil man last week, he had a chance to see some of the consequences of his destructive work. The pilgrim comes across the ruins of an old fortress, and the evidence suggested that it had been violently destroyed many years previously. Wandering through the debris, he falls into a cellar and there discovers the skeleton of a man who had apparently survived the attack, but found himself trapped in the ruins. He had kept a journal for as long as he could, and reading through the pages, it was apparent that this had once been a stronghold built by fellow pilgrims in order to protect themselves from something very evil and very powerful. Let me read from day 37. This is February 6th. The pilgrim is commenting here on the journal he found in the cellar. He writes this: "Reading through this poor soul's journal, I was drawn on one hand to his transparent foolishness, that he believed his own security could come only from the alliances he had built with other frightened men. But even as I scoffed, a chill ascended up my spine, like the rising waters of the flood I had only recently experienced. The man's talk of him sounded all too familiar. Was it possible that he was driven to this mountaintop by the same faceless terror which I too had met? This fortress had stood ages ago. Surely every foe that had made its way into the courtyard outside was now long dead and buried. Unless that foe was not human, and so not subject to the frailty of humanity. I pulled my collar around me as the chill reached my trembling jaw. The storm outside had moved on, but in the silence that followed it, I felt a fear which went much deeper. Night was coming on, and I had no intention of leaving this shelter. Not now." I read on. "Work on the walls progressed with an intensity that only driven men can maintain. Fortunately, there were a few among us who knew enough about masonry to advise the rest, and soon a proper fortress was rising out of the rocky peak. We took heart in our labors and even began to relax and enjoy the camaraderie of a shared burden. Some evenings we sang together and shared stories of our youth. The laughter was almost as infectious as our fear. It wasn't long before we all felt a bravado that approached nationalistic proportions. We even began to turn some travelers away, those whom we felt were not good enough to join our ranks. We had built this pinnacle with our blood and sweat and did not intend to share it lightly. A flag was soon devised, and seeing it unfurled above the watchtower was the proudest moment of my life. We will survive, I convinced myself. We will endure." What we're seeing here is a biblical concept that you can find anywhere you turn. That is, the tendency of people to draw together into a common bond in order to oppose all outside threats, either real or imagined. The example of King Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon has been repeated generation after generation, and the words we find in Daniel chapter 4, verses 30 and 31 are all too familiar. We read, "And the king said, Is not this great Babylon, which I have built by my mighty power as a royal residence and for the glory of my majesty?" While the words were still in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven. "O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken. The kingdom has departed from you." But take heart, fellow pilgrims. There's a better way to live in a world surrounded by the powers that would destroy your soul. Before this week's reading is finished, you'll have discovered rendezvous. Next week, we'll learn more about it and how it relates to you personally. This week, be safe, knowing that the God who made you also loves you and wants the very best for you. Let's meet again next time, okay? Y'all come back now. Here, a depression in the trail, anywhere he can gain an advantage. His strength is in his power of deception. If he can convince you that you're defeated, he's won the battle.